everyone turn to Job chapter 29. So in our last lesson, which was quite a while ago, we saw the start at least, of the Lord's response to Job and his friends. The Lord speaks for 4 chapters to them, which is shorter than most of the longer monologues in here, but longer than quite a few of the others. And it came directly after Elihu's 6-chapter monologue against Job, in which he sort of pretended to be in between Job and his friends, but was really just in the same camp as Job's friends in insulting, tearing him down, and proclaiming things about God he had no right to. So God intervened, and he began this by first reproving Job's friends and Elihu for speaking words without knowledge and thinking they could speak on his behalf. But the vast majority of what he says is directed at Job. And he, for the first part of it at least, in the first chapter that we saw, spoke to Job through a series of questions. Much of what Job has been doing up to this point is questioning God and demanding answers as to why what is happening to him is happening. And God responded in kind, asking him questions. God's questions were all based around the creation of the world and its natural forces, things like weather and gravity, the things that hold this entire planet together that we really don't understand even if we think we do, and the things he has absolute mastery of, which he displayed with the global flood and many other events both before and after that. And the reason that he did this, the reason he was asking Job questions about these things, is because first at creation, and then second after the flood, God commanded that mankind multiply, spread across the earth, and control it. And we have not done that. Job couldn't answer these questions because he doesn't know the first thing about this planet, just like none of us do. That's an affront. We're supposed to. God commanded that mankind subdue this world, and we haven't done it. And so his point is in showing Job's inadequacy, the most basic function of mankind he has failed to carry out. So who is he to question God? That was the reason that God questioned him in this manner. Now, near the end of chapter 38, God stopped asking about the creation itself, or about the world itself, I should say, and started asking about animals. He asked a few questions about animals specifically. And that is the vein that he continues in chapter 39. So in chapter 39, God continues speaking to Job out of the whirlwind, I might add. He is speaking through a massive storm that's taking place around them. Knowest thou the time when the wild goats of the rock bring forth? Or canst thou mark when the hinds do calve? Canst thou number the months after that they fulfill? Or knowest thou the time when they bring forth? They bow themselves, they bring forth their young ones, they cast out their sorrows. Their young ones are in good liking, they grow up with corn, they go forth and return not unto them. Who hath sent out the wild ass free? Or who hath loosed the bands of the wild ass? Whose house have I made the wilderness, and the barren land his dwellings? He scorneth the multitude of the city, neither regardeth he the crying of the driver. The range of the mountains is his pasture, and he searcheth after every green thing. So it's odd that God would then ask about goats for 8 verses. He says that Job doesn't know the time that they bring forth calves, which would be a surprise because goats have been domesticated for pretty much all of recorded human history. And we've had a pretty good grasp, as far as we can tell, on their habits and their patterns, including breeding patterns and when they have children. But there is always variability with animals, and there are accidents and issues that occur when they have children. I think that extends to pretty much all domestic life or domestic animals that we have domesticated on this planet in agriculture. We think we know and control them a lot better than we do. And the wild ones especially, we have no control or understanding over. They do what they wish away from mankind without our intervention at all. They are completely under the authority and power of God. And his point, what he says specifically to Job, is who gives them the knowledge to do these things? The young ones, they're born. Their parents can't teach them. They can't talk to them. But they grow up. They eat the wild things of the land, the corn. Corn just means grain, so they're surviving off of the plants around them. And then they leave their parents and go off, and they don't return. Why do they do that? It's because God directs them to. God is the one that gives animals their wild impulses. He's the one that directs their actions more often than not, and we don't understand that. We can't control that. We have no mastery over them, and they'll do this regardless of human intervention. This is something that you see a lot of going through the book of Job from Job and his friends. They talk a lot about the creation, the weather, the animals, and other things that God created, and they talk about how he made them for mankind. And it's true that to an extent God did make many things on this world for us, but he didn't make all of it for us. Much of it he made for him. He talked about in chapter 38 how he causes the rain to fall on an area where no man is. He makes the land bring forth. And why does he do it? He says that he does it for the land and for the animals that are on it. God provides rain so that the animals can eat and that the land can drink and grow plants. God does this because he cares about the plants and the animals too. And that's part of the point here. These first 8 verses are to show Job as well that he is not the center of the universe, that mankind is not the center of the universe. God is. God made a lot of things for mankind, but he didn't do it for us. He did it for him because he cares about us. But it's still about him, not us. And the same can be said of all the animals. Now, there's another reason that I believe he points these out, and it's to show the more natural course that God had commanded all of creation to take. Animals do not congregate together in cities. They do not form societies. They don't use higher thought. Now, God gave us higher thought for a reason, but it is not his will that we congregate together in great swelling masses. That's not what he desires of us. In verse 7, he says, he scorneth the multitude of the city, neither regardeth he the crying of the driver. The driver refers to a carriage driver. It's really just talking about when you're in a crowded area, people think it's new to cars with the horns. It's not. No matter how far back in human history you go, you'll have people on vehicles screaming at each other in the streets of any major city because they have places to be and you're in their way. And people get out of the way more often than not because they don't want to get run over. The animals don't care. They're not a part of this, and they shouldn't be. Neither should we. Everyone go back to Genesis chapter 9, verse 1. This is where God gives his command to Moses, or not Moses, to Noah after the flood. And the one that most people remember is to multiply and replenish the earth. That is important. But there is a part of replenishing the earth that most people don't think about. They hear that and they believe it means, grow plants, understand the world, manipulate it. We are to do those things. It says in verse 1 of chapter 9, and God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moveth upon the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hand are they delivered. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you. Even as the green herb have I given you all things. So mankind is supposed to be across the entire world and subjugating all of it. Does anyone know what percentage of the world's population lives farther away than 10 miles from a coastline? And when I say coastline, I mean from any major body of water that connects to the ocean. That includes rivers, lakes, and seas like the Mediterranean. Those aren't technically on an ocean coast, but they do go directly into the ocean. It's less than 10%. Less than 10% of people live like us, away from the coastline. More than 90% of the world's population is clustered around the coasts. And it's because that's where the money is. That is not the design that God has made his world or us to abide by. We're supposed to spread across it, to multiply and replenish it, but that's not what mankind is doing. And the reason for that we can see in chapter 11 of Genesis. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and there they dwelt. And they said one to another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. The first city, Babylon, was established to shake its fist at God. That is the reason it existed. And that's the reason every city since has existed. Every large city that humans congregate in is an affront to human nature, or really to the command of God. God commanded that we spread across the earth, but that's not what humans have done. We've congregated together in these giant piles where we build up instead of out. We're not supposed to do that. God gave us this land to inhabit and control, but instead, almost all of it is unfruitful. Very little of it is used. The vast majority of the planet is uninhabited. And it's because people want to pile in on top of each other, and they want to do that for one very simple reason. They can sin, and no one knows they're sinning because there's too many people to keep track of. That's the reason that they congregate together. It is to rebel. Now, I'm not trying to say that if you are living in a large city, that makes you a rebel against God. Most people don't even think about it to that extent. They're generally just committing other sins as well because everyone is committing sins. The point is, the very existence of cities is not just a human invention. The devil has designed a world system that rewards them for existing and rewards people for being in them, because he wants people in them so they can sin more. So they'll be tempted to sin more, and they'll have the ability to do it. It's a lot harder in a smaller town with very few people in it to get away with open and notorious sin. But in a great big city, it's very easy. You take 3 blocks down the road, and most people won't even know who you are. So humans are not supposed to do that. And the animals don't do that, as God points out in verse 7 of Job chapter 39. The goats don't do this. And that's a good thing. Animals shouldn't, and neither should people. We should not all be clustered together in one place. He goes on, talking about a different animal. Will the unicorn be willing to serve thee, or abide by thy crib? Canst thou bind the unicorn with his band in the furrow, or will he harrow the valleys after thee? Wilt thou trust him because his strength is great, or wilt thou leave thy labor to him? Wilt thou believe him, that he will bring home thy seed and gather it into thy barn? Canst thou? So, from verses 9 to 12, he talks about the unicorn. Now, I'm going to dispel a few things about this as a matter of some debate on exactly what this is. I don't have solid answers. That's the first thing I'll say. I cannot tell you for certain what this means, but I'll give you my best interpretation of it. And I can say with certainty that it is not a sparkly horse with a spiral fey horn on its head that has magical powers. That's never existed, ever. The original word unicorn, or really I should say the word it's translated from, the one it's translated from here, is an ancient word that refers to wild oxen or anything with one horn on its head. Now, because of that, we don't know exactly what it's talking about. It reads a lot like it's talking about a wild bull. This is not, this is a strong creature, but it is not the strongest thing on the world. It's powerful, but it seems like it can be domesticated. But it's something that God says someone wouldn't trust fully. Now, I think personally that it could be something like a one-horned rhinoceros, some sort of species that's no longer on this planet. But that is a guess. I cannot say that with certainty. It seems like it's something you wouldn't domesticate, but it could be read just as easily that it's something you would domesticate, but you'd keep a very close eye on. If you're using an ox to plow a field, you would not just let it roam free. You wouldn't put the plow on it and say, go plow the field, and trust it's going to go do that and then bring everything back to you. If you send it out to that field, it's eating the field. So you have to direct it so that it doesn't do that. You can't trust it or believe it that it's going to bring home the seed that you sent it out to harvest and then gather it into the barn. You have to do that. So it could be read either way. This is talking about a domesticated or domesticatable animal, a strong ox or bull of some kind, or it could be about something more like a rhinoceros that cannot be domesticated. Either way, he's referring to a very strong, probably draft animal of some kind. But we can't say for certain. The point in bringing it up, however, is to show how little control we really have over these animals, even things like oxen that are used in farms around the planet and other similar bovines, to pull plows and other heavy machinery. We can't trust them at all, and we certainly can't really control them. You can kind of direct them, but you have to do it more through subterfuge, where you put something they want in front of them and you get them to start marching and they pull something behind them. It's not really why they're doing it. They're not doing it to help you or because you told them to. They're doing it because there's a benefit in them for it. You cannot control them. God can, but mankind cannot. It's another area of this creation where we fall short. In verse 13, gavest thou the goodly wings unto the peacocks, or wings and feathers unto the ostrich, which leaveth her eggs in the earth, and warmeth them in dust, and forgetteth that the foot may crush them, or that the wild beast may break them. She is hardened against her young ones, as though they are not hers. Her labor is in vain without fear, because God hath deprived her of wisdom, neither hath he imparted to her understanding. What time she lifteth up herself on high, she scorneth the horse and his rider. So this time, he's talking about the peacock and the ostrich. Now, we don't know for certain if the animals that he's referring to are what we call a peacock and an ostrich. The words change meaning over time. But it is pretty clear he's talking about ground-dwelling animals that have pretty impressive plumage. A lot of people, a lot of commentators that I've read, don't think that the ostrich is referring to what we call an ostrich, because he makes a point of calling their wings goodly, which means beautiful or effective, and ostrich wings are really neither. But then again, that's my opinion, and God created them for a reason. He wants them to look the way they do, so maybe he thinks they do look beautiful. Either way, he's talking about ground birds of some kind, and either one, or both really, fit in this description. He says in verse 14, which leaveth her eggs in the earth and warmeth them in dust. Both ostriches and peacocks leave their eggs in the ground, and they don't build nests. They don't like arrange sticks on the ground or anything. They dig a hole in the dirt, and then they drop a bunch of eggs in there, and that's how they nest their young. Now, the way that they do this differs slightly. The ostrich, basically you'll have one male that's sort of dominant over a bunch of different females. They'll all lay their eggs. He'll dig a hole and he'll put all of them in. And there can be up to 60 ostrich eggs in a single nest hole. And then he'll direct one female to stay there and the rest go their own way. In that way, they could be scorning their eggs and not even regarding them. But there is still one that's keeping an eye on them. Peacocks, I think the way that they handle this would make more sense. They also dig a hole in the ground. They'll lay an egg there, but then the female that laid the egg will get up and walk away. It'll be away for days to weeks while it lays more eggs and collects other eggs and then puts them all there till it has what it decides is a full nest, and then it stays there. The males aren't a part of that, but either way, the argument could be made that he's talking about those animals or some other type of ground bird that those words referred to at the time. Regardless, His point in talking about them is that while other animals care about their young, these birds don't seem to. That's because God has decided they're not going to. He did not give them the wisdom and understanding to care about their children, which means that the impulse to care about children is from God. It's a natural one that he gives people through wisdom and understanding, that they are valuable and they matter. And because of that, they care about them. These birds are foolish. They don't understand that. They don't know that they matter. They just nest on them because it's what they're supposed to do. But they don't really care, and they forget about them very quickly. You can especially see that with eggs, or with chickens and their eggs. If you ever take a chicken egg and break it around a bunch of chickens, they do not care about that egg at all, and you will see it pretty clearly. In verse 18, he says, "What time she lifteth up herself on high, she scorneth the horse and his rider." This leads directly into the next passage that he talks about. "Hast thou given the horse strength? Hast thou clothed his neck with thunder? Canst thou make him afraid as a grasshopper? The glory of his nostrils is terrible. He paweth in the valley and rejoiceth in his strength. He goeth on to meet the armed men. He mocketh at fear, and is not affrighted, neither turneth he back from the sword. The quiver rattleth against him, the glittering spear and the shield. He swalloweth the ground with fierceness and rage, neither believeth he that it is the sound of the trumpet. He saith among the trumpets, Ha ha, and he smelleth the battle afar off, the thunder of the captains and the shouting." So he's talking specifically here about a war horse. Horses in general are, of course, very strong, but naturally they're also pretty skittish. They run away from you very quickly. War horses, however, do not run away. He talks about, in verse 20, "Canst thou make him afraid as a grasshopper?" If you see a grasshopper on a blade of grass and you run at it, what's it going to do? It's going to jump away from you, and it's going to get as far away as it can because it's terrified. If you see an angry, aggressive horse that's trained for war and you run at it and make a loud noise, what is it going to do to you? It's probably going to attack you, either with its teeth or with its paws, or both. But it will probably attack if you try to antagonize a war horse. These were mean horses. These are not horses like we know them, that people just rode and fired weapons from in combat. These ones got in the middle of a battle, and they kicked, and they clawed, and they bit until the things around them were dead. That's what these horses were trained to do. They were mean, aggressive, and strong animals. They were a terror on the battlefield. Because properly armored, you can't just stab it and bring it down. And even if you did, horses are very tough, especially if you're using medieval weapons. The Mongols of the steppes would ride horses, of course, everywhere. They're very famous for it. And they lived with these animals like they were one being. If they got thirsty while riding around, they could open a vein on that horse and drink its blood to survive. And the horse wouldn't even notice, because they don't need all of their blood to keep on operating. They're hard to bring down in combat, especially ancient combat, and it makes them terrifying. The war horses are not afraid of loud noises like normal horses. You blow your trumpets and give shouts in combat, they don't care. They're going to ignore it completely. They're going to ignore the dust clouds that are everywhere and the aggressive flurry of the battle, and they're just going to keep fighting. Now, mankind bred the horses to do this, and because of that, we think we're the ones who made them that way, but we're not. It brings to mind a particular verse in Proverbs, chapter 21 and verse 31. Does anyone know which one I'm talking about immediately? It's "The horse is prepared against the day of battle, but safety is of the Lord." We can set these things up all we want, but the only thing that actually makes them angry and fierce is God. And the moment he decides to, they're not. Even in the heat of battle, one of these hardened horses can lose its nerve and bolt, doing the exact opposite of what you want it to do and potentially costing you your life. It's because it's not on the horse. If it were, mankind could control it, but we can't. God's point here, mankind thinks that he has bred these horses to be strong. But what's the first thing he asks in verse 19? "Hast thou given the horse strength?" We have not. Their strength doesn't come from us. We've learned a way to somewhat manipulate it to hurt each other. But at his whim, God can take it away from us, just like he can take anything else, because we don't command these horses, just like we don't command any other animals. In verse 26, he says, "Doth the hawk fly by thy wisdom and stretch her wings toward the south? Doth the eagle mount up at thy command and make her nest on high? She dwelleth and abideth on the rock, upon the crag of the rock, in the strong place. From thence she seeketh the prey, and her eyes behold afar off. Her young ones also suck up blood, and where the slain are, there is she." So he's talking about birds now, specifically birds of prey. I think this is more reference to the sort of hawks and eagles as opposed to things like falcons. Hawks and eagles generally make their nest very high up in rocks or in very tall trees. Falcons will usually go further down towards logs or woodpecker holes that they've made, and that's where they prefer to live because they're small enough to fit. But these larger birds don't. They're very impressive, but they build their nests very high up, and we really don't understand the nature of how they operate. He points out a few things about them. They're flying, which is done by wisdom, he says. And their eyes, they can see their prey afar off. Their eyes are far better than ours, and we still don't understand them, not really, just like we don't understand our own bodies. Just like we don't really understand how they fly. We claim we do, we think we do, but we really don't. It's a very impressive feat they have, where they can see whatever they need to miles away and zero in on it exactly, while also flying directly towards it. I imagine even if I could fly, it'd be pretty hard to aim for what I wanted to aim for. They do it perfectly, with exact precision, and they do it every time. They'll find dead creatures, and they'll bring their young to them so that they can eat, or bring the things to their young. Either way, it's impressive that they're able to do this, and it doesn't come from man at all. The wisdom and understanding they use to stay alive, God gives them, not us. And it's also important to note that birds specifically are a major hassle across all of human civilization. It doesn't matter where you go. Did you know that there are falcons that'll nest in the tops of skyscrapers in every major city? Falcons, they'll live up in the skyscrapers. You have pigeons everywhere that you can't get rid of. Go to any coastal area, no matter how developed, and no matter how strict the countermeasures against them, there are seagulls everywhere. Did you know that Australia, they have emus, kind of like ostriches? At one point, they had too many emus, and they conducted military operations to try and reduce their population, to cull a bunch of them. They failed. There were more emus at the conclusion of their operations than there were beforehand. These birds, as simple as they seem on the surface, just sort of defy our attempts to get rid of or restrict them. They go where they want, and they do what they want, and they're an ever-present hassle everywhere. Even out here, shingling gets damaged across roofs everywhere, including in our neighborhood, by doves that like to perch on them. Doesn't matter how many you kill or what countermeasures you put in place, they will continue to be a hassle. And that's the point. These creatures defy our understanding, and we have no control over them. Only God does. And that's really the point of the entire chapter. God is the one who directs the animals. He has complete and total authority over them. And the authority that he gave to us, we have not exercised. We, as humans, have not taken over the world. Now, that sounds like a reproof, like I'm telling everyone, go out and control the animals. But it's not that easy, because we're sinners. We've sinned. We've lost the authority that God gave us, partially to the devil. But partially, he made the animals afraid of us, because he doesn't want us to kill them all, because that's what sin nature would really cause us to do if we had that sort of control over them. That failure, though it's one that we cannot overcome, we cannot control the whole world, we're simply incapable of it because of our sin, is still our failure, and it's because of us. It might seem unfair that God would hold us to that sort of a standard, but why shouldn't he? The only reason we can't carry it out is because we are sinners. If we weren't sinners, we'd have authority over them, like the Lord Jesus did, like Adam did. But we are sinners, so we don't. The reason that Job has failed, that all of us have failed, and mankind will continue to fail until the kingdom age, is because we're sinners. And there's no getting around that. And that's really the point of God's entire message against Job, and the reason that he will continue with this message. It's to point out that Job is a sinner who has no authority, no right to question God, or at all compare himself to him, which Job has done. In chapter 40, moreover the Lord answered Job and said, shall he that contendeth with the Almighty instruct him? He that reproveth God, let him answer it. So God has taken a break in his monologue, about halfway through, and he's demanded an answer from Job. He demanded this answer at the start, told him to gird up his loins like a man and answer, and then he gave out all his questions. Now he's stopping and demanding an answer again. He wants Job to answer why he has not done these things, why he doesn't know everything that he should know about this creation. And Job gives the only answer that a sinful, unregenerate man could. Then Job answered the Lord and said, behold, I am vile. What shall I answer thee? I will lay my hand upon my mouth. Once have I spoken, but I will not answer. Yea, twice, but I will proceed no further. So he said there's no point. And this he acknowledged back in chapter 9 of Job, where he said, why contend with the Almighty? If I argue against him, what could I say that he's not going to beat? Which really, understanding that, should mean that you wouldn't argue against him. But I pointed this out before, that Job was holding contradictory ideas in his mind. He would say in one breath, God is perfect, almighty, all understanding, all powerful, and all good, so how could I ever argue against him? And then in the next, say, this isn't fair and he shouldn't be doing this to me. Those two thoughts are mutually exclusive. You cannot believe them both. Either God is all good and all right, or he's wrong. Those are the two options. Job has proclaimed both. And in a situation where you proclaim both, God will hold you accountable for the wrong one. You don't get to use the first as a cover from the second. Job has contended with God regardless. Specifically, in Job chapter 10, verse 2, Job demands an answer from God. And he says that he would reprove him if God gave him one. He demands an answer, and he intends to answer God with a reproof, to show him that his judgment is wrong. Which is why God specifically says, "He that reproveth God, let him answer it." So Job has made these proclamations, and he has not yet repented. He said, "I'm not going to answer," because he knows it's foolish. But he has not yet repented. He has not yet shown that he understands the point God is getting through to him, that he has no right to question him. He is still holding on to his pride. He's not yet let it go. So God continues in verse 6. Then answered the Lord unto Job out of the whirlwind, and said, Gird up thy loins now like a man. I will demand of thee, and declare thou unto me. Wilt thou also disannul my judgment? Wilt thou condemn me, that thou mayest be righteous? Hast thou an arm like God, or canst thou thunder with a voice like him? Deck thyself now with majesty and excellency, and array thyself with glory and beauty. Cast abroad the rage of thy wrath, and behold every one that is proud, and abase him. Look on every one that is proud, and bring him low, and tread down the wicked in their place. Hide them in the dust together, and bind their faces in secret. Then will I also confess unto thee that thine own right hand can save thee. So the reason God is coming at him so aggressively is because he hasn't yet let go of his pride. Job talked in chapters 29 and 30 specifically about the status he once had in the city and how much he missed it. He was a well-respected man, so respected that the elders and the wise men of the city were silent when he entered the area, and the young men were afraid of him because they didn't want to speak because he'd make them look like fools. He talked about how he was very mighty in the city. He had great power and authority, and he used that to hurt the wicked and help the righteous, to take from those who shouldn't have what they have and give it to those who should. Now, these are good things if they're done with wisdom, which Job, I believe, did use wisdom in these things. However, in saying these things, he then, near the end of chapter 30, said that God would not reach his hand down to the grave. The grave he's talking about is himself in there. You can tell from context. And his point is, God won't answer me when I pray to him because I'm too low. He only reaches to those who are higher up, like I used to be. And he compares that to how he acted when he was rich and powerful, helping those who were below. He blasphemed God very directly, putting himself above the high and lofty one who inhabiteth eternity. And God took it personally. God is offended that his child would ever say such a thing about him. And he's demanding an answer. He's saying, if you were in power, then deal with all of the wicked. There are still wicked in Uz. They're still abusing Job right now, almost all of them. The whole city has turned on him. So what did all of his power do? What good did it accomplish? Has wickedness gone away? Has he fixed the city and turned it into a bastion of righteousness? No. He was one potentially light spot in a city of darkness, and the moment he was gone, there was no light. That's because his actions there did not change the course of that city. They may have bought it more time from God's judgment, but he did not fix it. He did not lift it up. He has no power over the hearts of men, not like God does, and his judgment is flawed because he also made mistakes in everything that he did. And when you make mistakes, you're certainly not going to convince everyone. You see this today with really any public figure, even the ones who I'm generally positive about. They'll say plenty of things that are right and good or better for whatever it is that they're doing, and they'll say one thing wrong, and that's what everyone jumps on. It's because they're human. You can't expect perfection from them, but that is what people expect. And the moment they're not perfect, everyone turns on them. We as Christians are supposed to be better than that. We're supposed to recognize the faults that humans have. And when someone falls and does not live in sin, when they recognize their faults, they fall and then they repent, we're to welcome them back. We do that because that's what God does for us. Now, if someone is living open in notorious sin, that's different. If they're not going to repent, then you cannot treat them as though they have. But when they have, you're supposed to accept that. The reason that God has us live that way is because it is wrong to expect perfection from any man. The only one we can expect perfection from is God. On the other hand, God can expect perfection from us. And it is right for him to judge us when we're not perfect, because he is. And he made us to be perfect. And it's our own actions that make us not perfect. We choose not to be. Now, no human will ever overcome that choice. We're too weak. But it is our choice nonetheless. Us being too weak to accomplish the task he set before us because of ourselves does not annul us of guilt. And Job is just as guilty as the rest of us. Because of that, his actions in that city were pointless. Not pointless for him, and not pointless for those specific people, but pointless for the city at large. He does not have the power and reach and authority that God does. He doesn't have the power he thinks that he does. He is not as high a man as he thinks he is. He was the richest, most powerful man in this entire region, and in one day, he was reduced to a pauper and a laughingstock to everyone. Because he didn't ever have that power. It was God's power. That was one of the few things Elihu said to him that was correct. Job talked about himself a lot, and he talked about God and what God did through him very little. And Elihu's point that he pointed out to him repeatedly was, why are you saying that you did these things? It was God who did them. He's the one who put you in that position. Anything you did was because of him. Any good that you ever did was because he put that in your heart. He should be the one gaining the glory, not you. Elihu was right about that, because it was never Job's glory, it was God's, always. When God says he judges the wicked, he does it many times through the righteous, oftentimes through the other wicked too. That glory is not theirs, it's God's, always. So that's God's first reproof to Job now. He is now directing personally at him. It's no longer just about the failures of mankind in general, of which he is a part. Now he's going to start comparing Job to some of the grandest things that God has ever created, things that he cannot compare to, and these are beasts, animals of the field. So in verse 15, behold now Behemoth, which I made with thee, he eateth grass as an ox. So Behemoth is a word translated from another ancient word that refers to horses or hippopotamuses or other large creatures. Now, a few things here do seem familiar to an animal like a hippopotamus or a horse or a rhinoceros or an elephant, which are what a lot of modern commentators try to say this is talking about. The reason they try to say it's talking about that is because many of them are gap theorists or something similar who believe that the earth is billions of years old, that God had an original creation that he wiped out and then replaced with a second creation many, many, many years later, and that all the fossils and dinosaurs and whatnot that we have under our planet are from that first creation that was wiped out. Their reasoning for that is because they want to marry up with evolutionists, essentially. They want to seem like they're not stupid, inbred, ignorant hicks that don't understand a thing and believe this dusty old book that's been wrong for 2,000 years. So they're just going to make stuff up and pretend that that makes more sense and try to bridge the gap. Well, there is no gap in the Bible. You have to invent one. It's never referenced anywhere in the entire Bible. There's only one flood that's ever talked about, and that is the global flood, aside from tiny little localized floods every now and then, like natural disasters. But there's only one real flood across the whole planet, because they claim the first world was wiped out with water. The old world was. 1 Peter tells us that. I believe it's 1 Peter. It might be 2 Peter. The old world was destroyed with water. But that old world was the one prior to our flood, about 6,000 years ago. That's the world that was destroyed. There was no gap in between creation. The fossils that are underneath our planet were put there by our flood. The dinosaurs and other creatures that we have records of and fossils of that we've never seen did not exist billions of years ago. They existed thousands of years ago alongside humanity and every other animal on the planet. There was not an animal on the planet other than potentially some fish and birds that predate human life. We were all made at the same time, like God says right here. So for that reason, a lot of people try to say that this verse is talking about something like a pachyderm, an elephant or hippopotamus or rhinoceros, but we will see going through it, that is not the case. So the first thing he describes about it is that it eats grass as an ox. So it's a herbivore. This is not a creature that subsists off of meat. This is rare for big, strong creatures. There are a few, like the ones I just laid out. Even though hippos can eat meat, they mostly eat plants. And there are a few other animals that have the right teeth to do that. Henry Morris thinks that this might be talking about something like a Tyrannosaurus rex, which is possible, that it could be talking about one of the big ones. They assumed that was a predatory creature, but that is really an assumption. I just pointed out the hippopotamus. They have predator teeth, sharp ones that can tear you apart. They mostly eat plants with those. There's a particular species of deer that has sharp pointed teeth like a wolf. It eats plants. Just because something has sharp teeth doesn't mean it did eat meat. And given that none of us have ever seen a Tyrannosaurus rex, we have no idea how they lived. He thinks it was something like that. We'll see going forward. There's a reason why. I think it's something more like a Brontosaurus, one of the big long-necked ones. But that is an assumption, since at this point I'm not even sure those existed. But in verse 16, he says, Lo now, his strength is in his loins, and his force is in the navel of his belly. So this is something that has a lot of strength centered inside of its body. This is different from something like a kangaroo, whose strength is almost entirely in its limbs, or a crocodile, whose strength is almost entirely in its jaw. It's not something like that. This is something that has strength inside of it, like an ox, or an elephant, or a horse, or something like one of those. So far, it sounds like it could be any of those things. But verse 17 is the main point of contention. He moveth his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together. The sinews of his stones here is talking about his tail. This is completive parallelism. And so what he's talking about is that there is a strong wrapping around the sinews of his stones. That's bones. He has a giant bony tail that is wrapped like a cedar. A cedar is a giant hardwood evergreen tree. They're big and they are famous for extremely strong wood. This animal has a tail that is strong enough to be compared to a tree. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever really looked at a picture or a video of a hippopotamus or an elephant or a rhinoceros or a horse, but for those of them that have tails, I would not compare them to cedars. I would compare them more to like a tumbleweed at best. They don't have bones in their tails, none of them, and what they do have is certainly not strong enough to be compared to something like this. This is not any animal that we have ever seen on this planet recorded in modern history. This does not bear resemblance to any of them. And it goes on. His bones are as strong pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. This thing's got bones that are comparable to metal in their strength. There is only one living creature on the entire planet we know of that has anything like a bone that is as strong as metal, and that is a deep-sea mollusk that lives near volcanoes. So it's basically a snail, and it's because it incorporates iron directly into its shell. That's why its shell is that strong. It's the only one we've ever seen that has anything like that. He compares its bones to metal. Now, elephants have very strong bones, but they're not as strong as iron. A shot from a rifle, if it hits one of their bones, will shatter it. It will not do that to something that has bones like iron. So this, again, is an animal we've never seen, at least not one we have seen in modern history. Now, I should point out, people might say, well, we have their bones, we could test that. We don't. I'm going to dispel that about fossils right now. Fossils are not bones. They are rocks that grew around bones that we preserved and found. The bones themselves are long gone. They have all been reduced to dust. So we haven't actually ever recovered any bones from the dinosaurs and other fossilized creatures. We don't know what their bone structure was actually like. What we have found is really kind of a guess. They put these things together, but they can't say for certain that they're accurate. There's many times where they'll proclaim a dinosaur existed, and then a few years later they'll find out that they put one of the bones together wrong and the whole thing falls apart and that dinosaur didn't exist, which is why I said I'm not really sure the long-necked dinosaur did exist at this point. But regardless, there are ancient animals that are no longer around, I think, because the change to the world's ecosystems from the flood made it unlivable for them. They just couldn't survive on this planet anymore, so they died out naturally, or because humans got to a point in their technology where they could kill them. It seems pretty clear that back in Job's day, they could not. And the reason I think that is because of right here in verse 19. He is the chief of the ways of God. That means he's the strongest of something that God has set up. I think he's talking about on the land. This is the strongest thing you'll find on the land. He that made him can make his sword to approach unto him. God is saying, I can make a weapon that can bring it down. This is contrasted with Job, who could not, nor could any man. Job may very well have been the wisest, potentially most intelligent man on earth at this time. I don't know that for certain, but it's very possible. He was known around the world as a very wise man. He could not devise a way to bring one of these things down, not with their current level of technology. In verse 20, surely the mountains bring him forth food, where all the beasts of the field play. He goes to an area where every other animal lives, and that's where they operate. They hunt each other, they forage for food. That's where it goes to eat. It's because it doesn't fear them. It's not afraid of any of them. It's the chief of the ways of God. Everything else on land fears it. Where it goes, others tremble. It says, he lieth under the shady trees in the covert of the reed and fens. The shady trees cover him with their shadow. The willows of the brook compass him about. This thing is large enough that it can take shade under entire trees. That's what it takes to actually cover it. Behold, he drinketh up a river and hasteth not. He trusteth that he can draw up Jordan into his mouth. This thing consumes so much water that it's compared to drinking up entire rivers. And clearly, they existed around Jordan at some point, around the Jordan River specifically. He taketh it with his eyes, his nose pierceth through snares. Snares are traps, of course. So clearly, some people did try to catch these things, and it did not work. Its snout alone was enough to overcome their snares. This is a beast unlike anything that we have ever seen on this planet. It is something that would probably strike terror into the hearts of anyone who didn't have a gun. I'm not sure how mankind could have hunted them even back in that time or in the days following. I think it's pretty certain that they died out as a result of ecosystem changes. They were in a desert, and if these things were reptilian, which we assume, but again, we can't say for certain. Scientists claim that. There isn't any actual evidence of that. If they were, living in a giant desert would be very inhospitable. I don't know if many of you are familiar with how reptiles can live, but they need the sun to survive because their blood runs cold. They need it to warm them up. But they very quickly dehydrate as a result. If they don't have plenty of water to drink, then they'll die. If mankind was using a lot of that water to grow crops, which in the area where Israel eventually was, in the land of Canaan, they certainly were, there would have been a lot less water to go around. These things would not have been able to survive as much. You chop down the trees, they don't have any shade, and they'll die of heat exhaustion out in the middle of nowhere. So I can't say with certainty what happened to these behemoths, but I can say with certainty he is not talking about elephants, he's not talking about hippopotamus, he's not talking about rhinoceroses, and he's certainly not talking about a horse. None of those things match the descriptions that he's given here. An elephant nowadays is probably the strongest land animal I can think of on the planet, maybe just the strongest animal in general. Where it goes, other animals flee. There are very few things that actively hunt elephants, and they generally have to do it by being opportunistic. But from the look of this, nothing hunted this creature. It was beyond that. There was not a thing on land that would raise a hand against it, including man. God has compared Job to this brute beast. It's an animal. It can't think, not really, not like us. It's not possessed of higher thought, yet God compares Job to it. Why? It's to show Job that for all of his proud boastings about his great work on this world and the mighty position he once held that he misses, he is nothing compared to an animal. This animal could show up and tear down everything he's got. He could bring everything he has to bear against it. It'll mean nothing. It can overcome it with just a piece of its body, just a snout. It could tear apart any snare that he's got. The reason that God points that out is to again show Job just how vast the difference is between the two of them. Job thinks he's better than every other man on earth, and he thinks that because he was. I will be clear about that. God singled him out specifically to Satan and said that he is a righteous man like no other who fears God and eschews evil. God was very proud of what Job had done on this world, but he was still a man. And being better than every other man on earth still puts you so far below God you don't even enter into the rankings. Job is nothing before him, and his statements need to be brought to account. Now, fortunately, this line of questioning, of comparing Job to these animals, does work. God compares him to one more in chapter 41, and it's probably the most infamous chapter of the entire book of the Bible because skeptics call us crazy for believing in fire-breathing dragons. That is what that chapter lays out. And 2 weeks from now, God willing, I will lay out that chapter, what God has to say about Leviathan, which to me is far more terrifying than Behemoth, but honestly, they're both incredibly terrifying to read about. But God lays out this great creature, and after that, Job realizes what God is trying to say to him, and he listens, and he properly repents, like he should have back before God had to start talking about this. But I'm not too hard on Job. He's still a far better man than I ever would be, I ever can be, and he is just a man, just like any of us. It would not be fair of me to expect perfection from him.